Okay.
Today is the first Sunday of Advent, for those of you that observe Advent or have in the past. And today is kind of a special day for me. I used to worship at St. Mark's Cathedral in Seattle, which is an Episcopal cathedral. And they had this big ornate service called the O Antiphons. And it was all the verses of O Come, Emmanuel. Except it was drawn out with readings and reflections and sermons, and the whole thing took about 5.5 hours to get through the song, because there would only be one verse at a time, and then there would be a psalm and a reading and a sermon, and then the next verse of the song, and so on and so forth. And traditionally there's about 600 people, so standing room only in this cathedral. And going to that year after year led me to question why they exerted all of this effort for just one song. And that led me to some Hebrew scriptures about a guy named Jacob. I'm sure many of you know who Jacob was. Jacob was not popular in his family. They threw him down a well, they sold him into slavery, he was just picked on. And if you've been picked on in your life, you know that there are days when enough is enough. And so Jacob left and went and married and grew in riches, which of course made his brothers furious again. And so the story about Jacob that leads us to our song begins in Genesis chapter 32. I'm going to read this to you. So we're going to be singing the first 2 verses of O Come, Emmanuel, because as you know, it's a long song. It's 8 verses. It's a very long song. But I'm going to start with the story of Jacob, because there's an interesting twist there that leads us into our song. So we begin. Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's army." And so he called the name of that place Mahanaim. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, instructing them, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now, and I have oxen, asses, flocks, manservants, and maidservants. And I have sent to tell my lord in order that I may find favor in his sight." And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and 400 men with him. And then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that were with him, and the flocks, and the herds, and the camels, into 2 companies, thinking, if Esau comes to the one company and destroys it, the company which is left will escape. And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, and I will do you good. I am not worthy of the least of all of your steadfast love, and all the faithfulness which you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become 2 companies. Deliver me, I pray to you, from the hand of my brother, for I fear him. Let not him come and slay us all, the mothers with the children. But you said to me, I will do you good, and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. Sorry, I was getting a little choked up by that. So he lodged there that night and took from what he had with him a present for his brother Esau, 200 she-goats, 20 he-goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milk camels and their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 she-asses and 10 he-asses, which I find within myself on a daily basis. These he delivered into the hand of his servants, every drove by itself, and said to his servants, "Pass on before me, and put a space between drove and drove." He instructed the foremost, "When Esau, my brother, meets you and asks you, 'To whom do you belong, and where are you going? And who are those before you?' Then say to him, 'They belong to your servant Jacob, and they are a present sent to my lord Esau, and moreover he is behind us.'" Likewise he instructed the second and the third, and all who followed the droves. "You shall say the same thing to Esau when you meet him, and you shall say, 'Moreover your servant Jacob is behind us.' For he thought, 'I may appease him with the present that goes before me, and afterwards I shall see his face, and perhaps he will accept me.' So the present passed on before him, and he himself lodged that night in the camp. The same night he arose and took his 2 wives, 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the river. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. And Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the break of day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched the socket of his hip, so that Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. And then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go until you bless me." And the man said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "Your name will no more be called Jacob, for you have wrestled with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Tell me, what is your name?" But he said to him, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him, saying, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel." And there he blessed him. All right, now we get to sing. Before we do, though, a little explanation. If any of you have studied anything about the Hebrew people, they are the most captured people in the history of the world. I mean, captured and captured and captured, and enslaved and enslaved and enslaved by nearly everyone. And so when I hear the name Israel, I think of Jacob and the Hebrew people that are his descendants, and how much time as a people they have spent in slavery, which is, which is where this song comes from. And we're going to sing the first 2 verses. And I would like you to consider the slavery of the Hebrew people when you're singing this song. And I actually have on my little portable tablet here, I have the music loaded, so accepted. 1 second, I'm sorry. I did have it loaded. I tried to be prepared, I really did. Here we are. And I hope that this is not going to shriek. So I'm going to move this microphone up a little bit. To the topic, care of the soul. You're probably wondering what any of that has to do with care of the soul. This is the beginning of the liturgical year of the church year. Today is the first day of the new year for the church. Depending on which church you go to, of course. But the first day of Advent is a day of hope. Day of looking forward, of waiting to see the coming Christ in our lives, the coming Christ within us, the coming Christ around us. And by that, I don't mean, Jesus is coming in a cloud and, some people are going to be taken out of their clothes, and the rest of us are just going to be left here to rot. That's not what I mean. I mean an awakening. I mean a realization, a choice, a way to bring the Christ mind, the realization that God is within us, God is around us, and God is within and around everyone and everything in our world. Advent begins the season of hope for this. And on the first Sunday of Advent, it is fruitful for my community to ask ourselves, what is it that I need to clear out of the road for Christ to come into my life? Whether or not we are Christian, the idea of the Christ is the same to all of us. the idea that we would lay down everything we have for the good of another. That we would share our last food so that somebody wouldn't starve. That is the Christ to our community. So, I have a very different take on the word Christ than most people who would stand up here and preach about a man named Jesus. Now, he was a great teacher. He really was. And the most exemplary way that he taught was by example. He taught his disciples by showing them. His teachings weren't always fun. They weren't always understood by those around him. In fact, the favorite of his teachings of mine happens to be the time he flipped the tables and started chasing people with whips. Because that's what I can identify with, is the table flipping. And the anger, the righteous anger as it's called, although there is no such thing as righteous anger. There is only stumbling blocks where anger is involved. But I digress. So here we are in Advent, asking ourselves, what do I need to remove from the road so that Jesus can come, Jesus the Christ, can come into our lives, into my life? And that is where we meet the care of the soul. When we take a step back and we find that silent place where that still small voice can be heard, we can clearly examine ourselves. Now, examination does not imply judgment. It does not imply any of the negative things that we are used to hearing and doing to ourselves to appease those around us or to fit into some kind of mold that those around us have constructed for us. The kind of examination I'm talking about is without judgment. It's clear, it's honest, and it shows us who we really are at our innermost point. That is the place where we meet God, where we hear the words, "Be still and know that I am." It is my humble opinion that if more people were able to do this at least once a year, that we would be living in a better place. But some people are busy, and I understand. I do. I have made a way of life of being still, but hearing the I am and knowing the I am escapes me, which is why it takes a whole lifetime for me. And it takes a whole lifetime for those who join together with me. We are not a romanticized version of, happy little monks on a hilltop. We struggle every day with all the things that all of you struggle with. We struggle to care for ourselves. We struggle to care for those around us. Sometimes we are insensitive. Sometimes we don't listen, just as every other human on the face of the planet. And sometimes we find that still moment, and it is that moment that we live our lives searching for. That moment where we can clearly see ourselves and clearly see God reflected within us. That moment is where you find the direction to care for your soul. And the direction that I have found is not complicated. The direction that I have found is only one word, and that is listen. Listen to yourself. listen to those around you. Listen to those who you care for and those who you may not. Because in listening, your soul can speak to you and say, I need this to be well. And wellness is what we all want, is it not? Wellness. Many of us think of having a perfect body or an abundance of possessions or perhaps being free of disease. And all of those things can account for wellness. But there is another kind of wellness, and that is the peace of the Spirit. I saw a word posted on Facebook the other day, and I'm going to get a little crass here, but we're all adults, and so I'm sure many of you can forgive my crassness. The word I saw was unfuckwithable, and it was clarified to mean someone who has found such peace of spirit that no amount of drama can shake them. And this for me is wellness. I don't have it yet. I mean, I get shaken up from reading Bible stories. I get shaken up from many things. I got quite shook up when we went to visit our family earlier this month in Boise. We were down there for 2 weeks, and it was quite shaking on all sides of the podium. My mother was in distress. Brother Gabriel's grandmother was in distress. Everyone was in distress. It was a very distressing visit. But somehow in that, I managed to find the peace enough to put my distress aside and to be accountable and available for those around me. And that is the wellness that I seek. That is the care of my soul. That is what gives me life. So when you hear the word listen, try it. It takes practice, a lot. I get up at 5 every day to practice. And I don't have it yet. That's why they call it practicing. You know, I busy myself with all kinds of work rather than going to prayer. I try to say my prayers as I do my work, and that is even more distracting than the distraction of trying not to pray at all. Listen. Sometimes you can listen when you're listening to music. Sometimes you can listen when there's no sound at all. Being free of environmental noise certainly is conducive to listening, but hard to achieve for 99% of us these days. I mean, we live in a monastery on a hilltop, and we are not free from environmental noise. We have cows and geese and noisy dogs and a demanding cat and a bubbling stove and all the little noises that once you settle down, you become aware of. And that's okay. It's okay that we don't have an hermetically sealed place free of any kind of noise. We still try to practice listening. Perhaps that noise is meant to hone our ability to listen. And perhaps it isn't. Perhaps it's just there to annoy us, which is another form of listening to your spirit. What annoys you? What angers you? What makes you sad? All of these things are important to know because they are a part of your spirit crying out for attention. Help. I need you. So I encourage you during the next 4 weeks, the season of Advent, culminating in Christmas, the coming of the Christ, or the Feast of the Incarnation, as it's called in the Orthodox way. Listen. Try to hear and know those things that require care in your soul. And while you are doing this, give thanks, because so many do not even have the consideration to listen. And so, having the inclination in the first place is a blessing in and of itself. Listen. And I would like to close with one more verse of the 8-verse song, which is the last verse, or the first verse, whichever you decide to read. Oh, come, oh,